Her name was Barbara, and for most of her early life, she looked like a completely ordinary person. She did not grow up surrounded by wealth, opportunity, or financial comfort, and nothing about her childhood suggested she would one day build serious wealth through real estate. Barbara grew up in a struggling household with many siblings where money was always tight and every expense mattered. The family lived in a small apartment and life was simple, sometimes stressful, and often uncertain when it came to finances. From a young age, she understood what financial pressure looked like because she had saw it every day at home. Bills had to be managed carefully, spending had to be controlled, and nothing could be wasted. Those early experiences shaped the way Barbara thought about money and survival. She realized very early that if she wanted a different future, she would have to build it herself because no one was going to hand it to her. When she became an adult, she entered the workforce like millions of other people trying to make a living and slowly finding stability. Her early jobs were simple and paid very little. Over time, she worked more than 20 different jobs, including being a waitress, receptionist, and office assistant, most of them paying close to minimum wage. These were not glamorous positions, and they did not provide financial security. From the outside, her life looked predictable and ordinary. She woke up, went to work, earned just enough to cover basic expenses, and repeated the same cycle week after week, like most working adults. Anyone observing her life from the outside would assume she was simply another person trying to survive on a modest income. But while working those jobs, Barbara started noticing something interesting about the people who seemed to be doing better financially. Many of them were not necessarily the smartest people she had met, and they were not always the hardest workers either. What made them different was that they owned things. They owned businesses, assets, and property that produced income even when they were not actively working. That observation stayed in her mind and slowly changed the way she looked at money and opportunity. She began paying closer attention to how ownership worked and why some people seemed to move forward financially while others remained stuck in the same cycle of working only for their paycheck. Eventually, Barbara found herself close enough to the world of real estate to see something that completely changed her perspective. She realized that salary pays you once, but a property can generate income repeatedly over long periods of time. That simple realization became the foundation of her strategy. If she could find a way to own property, then the money she earned from working could start building something larger than just a paycheck. The problem was, she didn't have a wealthy family, large savings, or investors waiting to support her. She had to start with very little and move forward carefully. Barbara began saving as much money as she possibly could. It was not fast and it was not dramatic. She simply became disciplined with the money she earned and avoided unnecessary spending whenever possible. Dollar by dollar, she slowly built enough savings to consider her first opportunity. When she finally stepped into real estate, she did not start with something impressive. Her first property was modest, simple, and far from luxurious. It was not the type of investment people brag about. However, it had something extremely important that most purchases do not have. It had the ability to generate income. Once that first property started producing income, Barbara made a decision that would shape the rest of her financial life. Instead of spending the money she earned from the property, she reinvested it. The income helped her save faster and eventually allowed her to move toward acquiring another property. One property slowly turned into two, and two eventually turned into several. Every time the portfolio grew, it created more income, and that income helped her create the next opportunity. The system began working slowly, but consistently. Barbara stayed focused on this strategy for years. She continued working, continued saving, and continued reinvesting. While many people around her were chasing fast money or looking for shortcuts, she was quietly repeating the same process again and again. She purchased modest properties that could be rented, improved their value when possible, and used the income they generated to strengthen her financial position. Over time, the properties began supporting each other financially. Rental income from several properties helped make future investments easier, and the value of those properties increased gradually as the years passed. From the outside, Barbara still looked like a completely normal person. She did not suddenly change her lifestyle, and she did not begin living in a flashy way that would attract attention. She continued living relatively simply, which meant most people around her had no idea what she had been building quietly in the background. The system she created kept expanding year after year as time multiplied the results of her decisions. Real estate markets slowly increased in value, and the rental income from her properties provided steady financial support for additional investments. Eventually, something remarkable became clear. The woman who had once worked low paying jobs and looked like any other ordinary worker had built a real estate portfolio that most would consider impossible starting from such a modest position. Property after property had been added to the portfolio over many years of discipline and patience. The number continued to grow until Barbara eventually owned 27 properties. 27 different properties built step by step, starting from small income, small opportunities, and consistent decisions. Her stories show that wealth does not always begin with a huge salary, powerful connections, or a lucky break. Sometimes it begins with observation, discipline, and the willingness to repeat a single strategy for many years. Barbara did not go and try and look rich. She did not chase the appearance of success. Instead, she focused on building assets that could produce income and grow in value over time. While many people spend their lives chasing higher paychecks, she quietly focused on ownership. By the time people had realized what she had built, she had already created something extraordinary, starting from almost nothing. Her journey proves that even someone working modest jobs can slowly build real wealth if they understand the power of assets and remain consistent long enough for time to multiply their efforts.